Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. And tonight we're going to be talking about the 2024 rookie class. I've heard a lot of pods. I've heard a lot of people talking about how great this class is going to be. People getting overly hyped, even going back into May and June when we were doing our rookie drafts. A lot of people saying trade those 23 picks for the 24 class because that class is going to be so much better. And sitting here looking through the pods that we've done recently, and I'm like, man, we haven't talked about the 24 class in a bit. It might be time. We've dove deep. We've done some C2C, recaps. We've talked about the 25 class, the 26 class. Like Aaron, filled us in very early on with all of the incoming freshmen before they, people even knew their names. So we've done some deep dives, but it's kind of time to get back to Devy and get back to the 2024 class, because that's, whether you're talking Devy, whether you're just talking about, trading draft picks, all that kind of stuff, that's what we're going to be, mostly focused on here in the next year are those players for the most part. So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. Hopefully, Aaron said that he was willing as well. He was excited to talk about this class, get back to the basics, back to Devy. But first, why don't we find out how Aaron is doing? How are you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing well tonight. Thank you, John. Pleasure to talk with some 2024 talk tonight. So excited for this class. Like you said, there's been quite a bit of hype now. But if you look back even a year plus, like people were saying, no, 2023, that's where you want to be. The 24 class is weak. And then these guys start coming on. So it just makes you realize that don't give up on a class just after a freshman year, right? Just after 1 year of data. There's a lot of guys still to emerge. So don't write a guy off. And understand that some of the guys who break out, they'll get surpassed as well, potentially along the way too. So all of that can happen.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is now you're starting to hear people talking about how the 2025 classes and all that spectacular, beyond a couple of players here and there and that kind of thing. It's like a never ending cycle. It's kind of hilarious, but that was why I wanted to talk about it tonight, because especially more recently, for whatever reason, I've been hearing a lot of people saying how hyped they are for the 2024 class, how they're feeling. They just feel like it's so much better than 23 class. And obviously we don't even know who the 23 class is, or are, I should say, 100%. So how can we even say that? But, the fact that we're comparing players that haven't even gone on the field to players that haven't even gone on the field is pretty damn hilarious. But obviously that's our jobs, is to sit here and talk about, who the best players are and all that kind of stuff. But I was, thinking back to about a year ago, about this time last year, and, we're talking about Kendre Miller, it was like maybe a possibility of being drafted. And now, Kendre absolutely blew up in last night's game, and people are talking about how the amazing catch that he made and all that kind of stuff. I feel like we need to figure out who those players are. Who are the Kendres? Who's that? But at the same time, who are the Zach Evans that we were also hyped on? And obviously, regardless of why, something happened along the way to where the NFL was just like, nah, dude, this isn't happening. Sean Tucker with the heart thing, it's a complete fluke. But who's to say that something similar doesn't happen? Hopefully nothing, hopefully it doesn't, but who's to say that something somewhat similar doesn't happen towards the end of next year, or going into the NFL draft next year, where we lose one of these players that we really liked, even if it's more of like a second tier, a third tier player, or whatever, we lose one of those guys. So, I guess before we start diving into all, individual players and all that kind of stuff, like, how do you feel about the 2024 class as a whole? At least for right now. Obviously, we know people are going to jump in, people are going to jump out, like that kind of thing. But as of right now, are you feeling like you should be going out and buying 24 first and trading for certain players and like that kind of thing? Or are you saying, maybe we should hold our horses a little bit?
Yeah, and a lot of it does boil down to what is your strategy in a dynasty, Devy, C2C league, what have you. it- do you want to try to invest in the future or do you want to try to win now? And there's always that back and forth, and you need to evaluate your team, right? I mean, that's going to make the decision for you, basically. Are you competing? Well, then that's probably going to hamstring your ability to really collect these 24 first. But just let's say just neutral strategy, like you could go either way. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of accumulating these assets, these 24 first. But however, in a Devy league, they're going to be depleted. So that strategy changes. But in Dynasty, yes, try to get those 24 first. The class is going to be good. And I think there's going to be some depth to it, which makes it interesting to acquire. Again, in Dynasty, maybe those second round picks, even pick up some extra thirds, right? Those always come in handy. I find myself, unfortunately, trading away some of them in the off season just to, upgrade in certain positions, upgrade my draft position in a rookie draft, etc. But try to get some of those back now. Start accumulating those because honestly, we're going to talk about a lot of names tonight, and they're very well. There's a number of interesting names as you get down into the second, even third round range. If you're projecting out what rookie drafts are going to look like, what this 24 class is going to shape up to be.
And I think that's the most important thing that I've learned, from being a Devy analyst is that, these guys that I've fallen in love with, not everyone else falls in love with them, including sometimes the NFL. But yet, I still believe in them. I still want to draft them. And, it's kind of funny because I was just talking in a group chat about Zay Flowers. Like, I was all about Zay Flowers for how long now? All I've talked about is how much I love Zay Flowers. And now he just blew up, or, he just scored a amazing touchdown in the preseason game, like literally like as we're speaking. And so everyone's like overly hyped about Zay this second. But, he was getting drafted towards the end of the first round, sometimes going into the second round, like it was in rookie drafts this past year. Like, his kind of talent should generally be, mid to late first, like at the very latest. And yet you saw him sneaking in to later, later areas with Josh Downs, not the greatest situation, but we love the player. Kind of the same thing. Like, I saw him going as late as like 209, 210, 211 sometimes. And, that was just absolutely insane to me. But you were talking about going out and getting these seconds, recouping some of these seconds right now. And I think that's a great idea because the Jaden Reeds, the Josh Downs, even throw in some of these tight ends and stuff like that. All of a sudden, the second round becomes really damn important. But it's where I'm accumulating these players that I've fallen in love with over the past couple of years. And maybe, like I said, Josh Downs got third round draft capital instead of second or first, like we were kind of hoping for. I still believe in the talent. He also didn't get the greatest quarterback to throw him the ball either, but I still believe in the talent. So maybe I'm not willing to take him at the end of the first, but I'm definitely willing to take him in the mid first or the mid second, and definitely the late second when he was falling there. And that's why I have like a 33% Josh Downs shares. So I'm feeling pretty good about that one. But to your point, that's why I feel like getting those seconds, getting those thirds, and trying to accumulate multiples is always a good idea, regardless of how you feel about the class. Somebody's always going to slip through the cracks because there's always going to be those Jonathan Mingos and Rashee Rices that you don't really believe in necessarily, but other people do because they got pretty damn good draft capital.
Yeah, and like you said, there's going to be guys who slip through the cracks, who go underrated in this process a year in advance, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. We'll talk about some of them today. Some just generalized examples: injuries, right? Guys who potentially have not just been healthy the last year or two, and they're really going to break out. Or maybe they were blocked, for some reason they were blocked. They showed some promise at some point, but just a sample size issue essentially and playing time issue. But yeah, we'll get into some more specific examples of that today. But you're right. There's going to be guys who emerge, maybe less and less of that. Now that we've really sharpened how many folks are out there evaluating, kind of scouring, scouring, the spreadsheet, scouring the film rooms. Like we're spending a lot more time trying to mine and really evaluate and find some of these gems early on. So I do wonder if that edge is starting to become just a little bit harder to get as that information is more widespread with all the Devy content, C2C content, all of that in the sphere nowadays.
Yeah, and I got kind of worried about that in this past draft class. Like, are people just getting too smart? Is there too much information out there? Like all that kind of stuff. But I feel like when it was all said and done, you still have at least a solid grouping of people that all they truly care about is draft capital. And so, when it's all said and done, it's like, did they get draft capital? Great, I'm drafting them. And so it always seems like, even like there's people that do this for a living, and you'll hear it, out of their mouths like, nope, did they get draft capital? Did they not? But that's really like the end all be all for them. And they literally do this for a living. And there, here we are. So I feel like as long as those people still exist, it's never going to be like, oh, it's just too smart. Like there's always going to be somebody that gets pushed up, pushed down, like that kind of thing. I'm not saying that like draft capital doesn't matter, but we've talked about it for years now, how like we're trying to be better than draft capital. We're not trying to be as good as draft capital. We're trying to be better. That's the whole point of the show. So like that's what we're doing here. But so obviously, you're feeling pretty good about the actual draft class itself. But then, like I said, talking about going back to the 2023 class, there were so many people that were saying, oh, once you get to 106, 107, 108, like that, start putting, just start sending those draft picks for the 2024 class, because you never know. Maybe those future picks are going to be 103 or 104 or whatever. They could also be 112. Who knows? It's a random first. That's the whole point of a random first. How do you feel about that strategy? And then, how do you feel about the 2024 class compared to the 23 class? Because obviously, like, we've done a lot of work on the 23 class. We've dove into it multiple times, whether it was podcast, articles, all kinds of stuff. Obviously doing all kinds of drafts and startups and everything else. You have to decide, how do you feel about these players? We haven't necessarily had to do that about the 24 class, but I feel like, obviously you're in deep enough to where you know who's in it, like you know how to feel about those players. And so how do you feel about the two different classes there?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, there's some similarities out there. Let's just say that, right? Right at the top of the running back class this year, strong. Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, maybe falls off after that. Next year could be the same thing, depending on landing spot, how injuries, things like that play out. I think that if we're breaking it down position by position, though, there's probably going to be more top end running backs in next year's class as it sits right now, and with the potential for some of those guys to truly break out in their third, fourth, maybe, usually third or fourth seasons. So potentially more than just those top two guys. Is there going to be a Bijan? Yeah, potentially not, but there's still gonna be some really, really top end running back talent. Go to the quarterback position, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, if you want to consider Anthony Richardson in there. I mean, ultimately, we have Caleb Williams and Drake May. As of right now, those guys seem like pretty clean prospects and not quite the same drawbacks that Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson display. I kind of like next year's quarterback class to give an edge. I like the running back class maybe next year, slight edge, but still a lot can happen, right? I mean, we know that some of these guys, Bijan, he landed in a great spot. Let's not try to get cute and sell Bijan for a couple of 24 backs. Like, yeah. But the wide receiver position for me, it's like, this year's class was strong there. Solid depth to it, solid top end. I mean, pretty solid top end. But I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in next year, Emeka Egbuka. I mean, we'll get into all those specifics today, but there's good wide receiver talent and also some tight end talent as well. So ultimately, I think it matches up, somewhat comparably, where it's a solid class in general.
Yeah, I think the only thing that would, maybe how I would counter that is, is there anyone that's going to truly stand out and become that Anthony Richardson where they're getting drafted at 104 in the NFL draft? I know, I have some players that I love to be the QB3. You have some players that you would love to be the QB3 in the 24 class. And obviously somebody's going to step forward, like we have an entire year. So, I mean, it's not 100% fair to make that determination just yet, but I don't know that, there was people talking about Anthony Richardson was going to be that guy anyway a year ago. Now, obviously, we both don't feel great about Anthony Richardson as a player, But now we're beyond that. Like, he already got drafted at 104 in the NFL. So he's already there. He's the starter for the Colts. Like, we're past all that. That happened. Is there anyone? I mean, once again, not to get into specifics just yet, but like, do you feel like there's a player that could become that QB3 that's right up there? What was it? Young went 101, Stroud went 102, and then Richardson went 104. Do you feel like somebody could be up there in that top 5 realm, or do you think that's a little unrealistic right now?
Yeah, we know how thirsty the NFL is for running or for quarterbacks, excuse me. But we also saw an instance here before when Kenny Pickett and all the rest of the guys, they were falling in the draft. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that there's another, top 5 to 10 quarterback. Somebody really breaks out and just has an excellent season. We'll talk about the candidates today, but honestly, as it sits right now, I would say yes, there will be another quarterback selected in the first. I don't know that it is going to be quite in that like top 5, top 8 slot, but we'll get into that. I guess who has a chance to do that. So there's that possibility, yes, but as of right now, I would say no. Probably in that 10 to 20 slot would be the next quarterbacks of the QB3 in the 24 class when it comes to draft time next year.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we've never truly gotten into on our podcast. We've always kind of just been, is the player good or is the player bad? Like that kind of thing. We've never truly gotten into where do we feel like they're going to be drafted, and maybe that's something we need to be better about, or talk a little bit more about at the very least. Like, once again, it's not the end all be all. Draft capital is not the end all be all, but it is important. So, it is something to keep in mind. But I'm with you. I don't really see anyone, as much as I love my QB3, I don't really see anyone that's going to be a top 5 QB right now. It's just like top 5 pick. I just don't see that. So maybe top 20 pick, something like that I could get behind. Top 5 seems like a stretch right now. And so, if we're just strictly talking about draft capital purposes, then, we might already be behind the 8 ball, when comparing the two classes there. But I'm with you. Caleb and Drake May, they hold their own. At the very least, you would say that they're right there with with Bryce and CJ Stroud. Obviously a lot of people would probably say that they're better, especially Caleb Williams. People just seem to absolutely love him, regardless of what he has done, hasn't done. Competition, it doesn't seem to matter. He's just like, people see like the highlights, and all of a sudden he's the 101, no matter what, the greatest thing that's happened in a decade and everything else.
And I think some of it's fair to a degree, as far as if you're comparing him to what we had this year. I just have more questions about Bryce Young's size, how that's going to truly propel him into fantasy stardom. He should be a good NFL quarterback for a long time, but is he actually going to utilize the mobility that he has? Because, I mean, he's a fairly athletic kid, but, is that going to translate to rushing success at the NFL level to a high degree? I don't know. Don't know that he's quite that Kyler Murray type as far as how much he's going to get on the ground. But and you can say there's some questions around CJ Stroud, and obviously the competence of Anthony Richardson just throwing the ball, right, processing the game. That's still a work in progress. So that's why I say, yeah, I think Caleb should be above those guys. But like you said, it's not a done deal. He's not drafted yet. He's not coming unscathed out of this season, but hey, there's a lot of indicators that this guy has really what it takes to be up there. And same with Drake May.
I agree. Why don't we go ahead and dive into the wide receivers? Because I feel like that might be maybe the weakest spot. I mean, you touched on it already for the 24 class. And I'm just looking through it, and I'm thinking back to last year, like once again around this time, and we had Josh Downs, we had JSN, obviously. Then he got hurt. That wasn't spectacular, but at the time, before he got hurt, everyone was saying JSN, number 1 in the class. Jordan Addison, number 2 in the class. There was even some people that would say that maybe you could, flip him back and forth, all that kind of stuff. Then Josh Downs was in the mix. Quentin Johnston was in the mix. Zay Flowers was in the mix for some of us. But you had the 4 or 5 players that everyone really seemed to be in on. This year, going to the 24 class, I really feel like that maybe three players that like everyone agrees on, and then after that it seems to kind of fall off. So that's why I'm a little concerned about this 24 class, because I'm looking at these players, or not in general, but the 24 wide receiver class, I should say, because I'm looking at these players and I'm like, there's some players that I like in here, but man, they're not this like top tier talent, per se. So how are you feeling about the wide receiver class? And then we can go ahead and start diving into the players here.
Yeah, as a generalized view right now, without all the specifics, I think the very top is strong, and after that, there's guys who they just need to put it together just a bit more than they did last year, and they're going to rise up just like maybe not Addison, because Addison obviously broke out at Pitt and then furthered that at USC, but um, there are definitely guys who can rise up even further, fairly high right now. So I'm actually not as concerned. I do think that there are a couple guys that will rise up. Now, does the depth thin out a bit? Because you talked earlier. I mean, we got Marvin Mims, we got Jaden Reed. And there's a whole list of guys who have the chance to be pretty solid NFL players. And with this class, there are more guys who really need to step it up there to supplement into that. But I actually think that this wide receiver class is just going to be fine this next year, and highlighted by the top end talents, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, for example.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you, but like I said, I just thinking back, like everyone already loved those players last year, so they were already there. If anything, Jordan Addison kind of fell off, he didn't have like a spectacular season. Quentin Johnston kind of fell off. People were talking about him being the wide receiver one in the class at this time last year. And then, of course, he went out and did absolutely nothing for like 6 weeks or something like that. And then, and then he had a fine end of the season. And now the funny thing is, I've come like full circle on Quentin, because I said that I wasn't the biggest fan because people were trying to put him at wide receiver one. Then, when he wasn't doing anything, I'm like, why the hell were we talking about Quentin Johnston? And now I have a couple shares. I'm like, he's on an exciting offense, like the wide receivers on that offense like to get hurt, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's not really important. But the funny thing is, I've kind of come full circle on Quentin Johnston. I still don't think he's this like badass. He's not in JSN level, Addison level, or even Josh Downs level. But I think that he can be a solid performer in a good offense. But like I said, that those players were already there, and I just don't feel like we have that. We have right now. I would say that we have Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka. I would say Emeka Egbuka, Xavier Worthy, and then Malik Neighbors. After that, I don't think you can. I mean, there's other names obviously, but I feel like those are the ones that like everyone would agree with. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I would say that's basically consensus to this point, and I think that's pretty safe to have them. And even if one guy falls out, it's not that dissimilar from this year's class, as far as just having a couple of those top end guys, and then there's a bit of a drop.
Yeah. So, and then like the funny thing, I actually saw who's it, Brandon Lejeune, I believe, posted something on Twitter today saying that Malik Neighbors is his number 2, which is surprising and interesting to say the least. I think I haven't seen too many people hating on Egbuka. Not to say that Brandon is. I really didn't read beyond that, so I don't know if he's hating on Egbuka, if he just loves Neighbors, because I mean it seemed like it was more of like a I love Neighbors post than an I hate Egbuka. But I feel like for the most part, people are going to agree that it's MHJ and Egbuka there. Neighbors getting into that mix is definitely interesting. And then, we're just going to hope for the best with Worthy, that Texas is good, Ewers is good, or at least good enough to get him the ball. He stays healthy, all that kind of stuff. But then once we get past that tier, I guess we would really say, 2 tiers there? 3 tiers? In that first 4 players, how do you feel? How are you breaking that down?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, I do have Marvin Harrison Jr. moving up and up and up, into that tier of his own, even though we had Emeka Egbuka basically there, just a smidge behind him for a long time. But yeah, so you could say that there's a tier break after Harrison Jr., then Emeka Egbuka. I would say that he is solidly ahead of Worthy and Neighbors. Whether you want to do a tier there, that's really your preference, right? I mean, I think that there is a palpable difference between him and those couple guys as far as just athletic talents. And I mean, Worthy's super athletic, but he's also very small, right? You're looking at 160-ish, 165, whatever he's at, maybe more to this point. But Ultimately, yeah, I think there is a bit of a difference. So you could say, yeah, 2 tiers there, 3 tiers there.
Yeah, I actually have it as 3 tiers. And so it's kind of interesting there. We're literally we've talked about 4 players so far, and we're already talking about 3 different tiers. Now I have someone else in that same tier, that same third tier. And I guess you could really even include a second someone else. I would say 2 more players in that third tier, along with neighbors for me. How do you feel about that? Would you have another 2 players in that tier, and then do you want to try and guess who they are?
Yeah, I don't know if I would actually group 2 more guys in there as of right now, but could I see that, trying to just forecast ahead? Absolutely. So I'm going to guess that you have Dorian Singer there. And then, second guy, Troy Franklin. I'm not sure that he's probably warranted that quite yet, but go ahead, hit me with your other guy you would consider there.
And now saying he's included in the tiers kind of fake because he's not that close, but he's right there. So we're gonna go ahead and include him. It's Juice Wells, baby. Juice Wells in that tier. Yeah, Singer and Wells. Those are my next 2. I absolutely love Singer, and I'll tell you, Wells is growing on me every single day. And I mean, he's getting hyped like crazy by just about everyone. Seems like everyone's kind of coming around on Wells, whereas like a month ago, I mentioned, oh, I like Antoine Wells Jr., and people are like, really? Why?
Yeah, I mean, the guy's got some good things to his game, and maybe the transfer up into higher level of competition. People question that, but I mean, he did pretty well, right? I mean, for South Carolina, he was producing, especially down the stretch, and him and Rattler have another chance to really do some nice things this season. So I could see him continuing to rise up. It's not quite in my comfort zone yet, but I mean, could he see the rise that like a Jaden Reed does? Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt. Now, what you're talking about is getting him into the first round of rookie drafts, potentially at the back end, if he's going to be with those other guys. And that, I don't know if I would feel as comfortable projecting quite at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, honestly, he's what, wide receiver 6 or 7 or whatever. Like that's not really first round. That's more like early to mid second round. Like once again, like a Josh Downs, Marvin Mims. Like it's kind of in that same realm right there. So I think that if he gets good draft capital, but once again, maybe we need to focus more on the NFL draft capital here. Do we think that Juice Wells can get first round NFL draft capital, or early second round, mid second round, whatever, like that kind of thing? Because then he's almost guaranteed to be in that late first, early second, mid second of rookie drafts if he has that, regardless of how you feel about him. But I'm sitting here saying that I do like him for sure.
Yeah, and then this is just a sidebar here, basically, like side tangent. But if you can project out which guys are athletic enough to really blow up in that pre-draft process, that's just another input that NFL teams use. Like, yes, are there successful players who are somewhat slow or test poorly or whatever the case is? Yeah, absolutely. There are guys, but oftentimes the guys who get that early draft capital who catapult up, yeah, there's some athletic backing to that as well to just fuel that hype around draft season and rookie draft season and the NFL off season then. So yes, that's a good point. And I do think that Wells is athletic. I haven't done too much of a recent deep dive into how athletic I ultimately think he stacks up.
To the moon, baby. To the moon. So now you said that you would not have another 2 players in that third tier with neighbors. Like I said, honestly, it was probably just Singer for me, if we're being realistic. But I was just throwing in Juice there just for fun. But he's a little bit further down. But how would you feel about that next tier then? So tier 4 of the players. Who are you looking at? Because I'm guessing you don't have Singer and Wells there.
I have Singer there. Wells is just a bit lower. Not necessarily saying again he's bad, but yeah, I really do like the Singer call. He's been growing on me this whole offseason. Ultimately, he needs to show some things that the NFL is going to be looking for. But I mean, that's a given with most of these guys, right? They have still some development to do, and he's in a great place. If you love Caleb Williams, well, you should love one of his most proven targets. Even though it is a transfer in, right? A little bit of a different situation for him. So yes, Dorian Singer there, Roma Dunze, Troy Franklin. Those are some common names out there. And I both like those guys as athletes, absolutely explosive guys. And then also guys just to step up and take that production to another level. So those are really the next couple of wide receivers that I'm considering here. Again, a bit of a projection with Troy Franklin, even more than Odunze, as far as, I mean, they'll probably have to take that step forward to land that draft one or round one draft capital, maybe round two.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just not ever gonna be as high on Franklin and Adunze as other people are. It's just, I don't like I get that they're in exciting offenses, but they don't do as much as I would like for them to do in those offenses. So maybe the NFL is gonna fall in love with them because they're gonna put up 1,200 yards or whatever they put up, and so maybe that's why the NFL is going to love them. But then I'm sitting here looking at it and going, okay, but they're throwing for 5,000 yards in that offense, so it's really not that spectacular. So I have them up here. I just don't. I don't love them, and I feel like especially Franklin Odunze, I feel like is kind of properly valued, but I feel like Franklin kind of gets pushed up into that like top-ish tiers where I'm just like I cannot possibly draft him there, and I'm always letting somebody else just take him before I would even consider him.
Yeah, that's fair. He's the guy who you just have to project him to take that next step. He was definitely much improved as a second year player after being a very high end recruit and a pretty incredible athlete coming out. So he's in a good situation. Bo Nix is coming back and competition left there at Oregon. Like this is his time to shine. And we know that these players should be getting better, year after year after year. He's very young and honestly, maybe you just look at counting stats. I don't have all the advanced metrics from last year off the top of my head, but almost 900 yards and 9 touchdowns. I think that there's opportunity for him to really blow up this year. But yes, you're right. As it sits right now, we can't say with confidence that he is better, but he could be better. Yeah, absolutely. If you're talking about guys who could rise up, he is one. However, like you said, his value currently in Devy leagues, C2C leagues, that's another conversation because there's a notable amount of value attached with Troy Franklin at this moment. It's maybe not the best proposition to trade for him right now, just because like how much higher can he go? I still think he can get higher, but he has already drafted like as if he's going to take that next step. You're kind of right there.
Yeah, if anything, I might be if I have Franklin. Once again, I don't hate the player by any means. I have him way up here, so like in the ranks. So I'm not trying to hate on him. I just feel like he's a little overvalued here. So I feel like if I had him, I might be trying to go get a Neighbors, like add to Franklin to go get a Neighbors, add to Franklin to go get a Worthy, like something like that. Like try to tier up while he has that kind of value. And then maybe you're able to take advantage of that. And then if he doesn't take that next step, then you're going to be feeling really damn good when it's all said and done. And if he does take that step, you still have Neighbors or you still have Worthy. Like it's really not the end of the world at that point. So I have a player that I think both of us, probably more so even me, were really super high on last year, and now I've kind of come down on him a little bit, but I still have him here in that next tier. I guess what are we going to say? Tier 5 here. And so it's Jacob Cohen. I was so, like I said, I was almost too hyped on Jacob Cohen last year. I guess I'm learning as I go here that when these players transfer up from the G5 programs, that they don't always perform exactly how they performed while in the G5 programs, as good as they were. But all that being said, Cohen was still good. He just wasn't like prolific. He wasn't amazing, that kind of thing. Are you kind of all out on Cohen, or do you still think that he has a shot of making it to the NFL? Obviously, like now, we know he's a senior. Like it's not. I'm not saying it's like the perfect prospect or anything like that. But I still think he has a shot at making the NFL, getting drafted, like fairly decently, that kind of thing. Or do you think this is too high for him?
I do think it's too high, and your question was, am I all out? And in Devy, I am pretty much yes. Now C2C still going to have value. In fact, going to see a spike in production potentially this year. It makes sense for him to produce. Like he's had this is year 5 for him. I want to say he has the experience in the system, and with Singer leaving, like, yes, that gives him a chance. But Singer, Tet, McMillan, I think that those guys are a little bit superior to him, honestly, in that transfer up in competition. I think exposed him a bit. I don't believe he's the athlete that we want him to be. We're pretty excited, and like, how high can a ceiling be? I'm transferring up, and ultimately wasn't maybe quite as explosive as we had liked. So ultimately, yeah, Coing is not a guy that I'm super high on currently in Devy. He's quite a bit lower in my ranks, but I was actually thinking you'd go with Dominic Lovett, a guy from Missouri who now transferred into Georgia at wide receiver. And guys like they like Luther Burden there, and this is the guy who just outproduced him. And I get he was older than Burden, but at the same time, it's like now he's going to a better offense where they're going to be playing in big time games, and he's going to be. I think he's the most talented guy in that room. I really do. I mean, other guys at Georgia just are not that proven. Yes, there's athletic talent there, but don't tell me that like Arian Smith is going to be like a way more polished and complete wide receiver. Like, no, he'll take the top off the defense. He'll run some 9 routes. That'll be fun. But we know who's going to be the reliable guy in that offense. It should be Dominic Lovett if Georgia is playing to their strengths amongst the wide receivers, that is. And yes, they're run heavy as always, but I mean, Dominic Lovett, good guys get targets, right? Isn't that the whole concept in football in general, right? Get your best players the ball. And Dominic Lovett is a playmaker. He's a versatile player in a Georgia offense where a lot of people, if you like Carson Beck, if you're listening to this and you're one of those guys who has Carson Beck top 10 in this class or expecting, like, you should like Dominic Lovett as well. There's no doubt, because Carson Beck, to do well, he's going to need to throw it to guys such as Dominic Lovett, in my opinion. So anyways, that's my little spiel there. And we definitely need to be considering Lovett here.
Absolutely. He's actually next for me directly after Coing. I think that Coing is one of those things like, and he is 5th-year player. I was looking, I'm literally looking at the screen. It says 5th. And then I looked at the player below him and it said senior. So I was like, well, whatever. So I think that's one of those things where like it's going to play itself out. Either Coing is going to take that next step this year, or he's just going to fall off and then he's going to completely plummet down the rankings if he doesn't do anything spectacular this year. So it's going to play itself out. But as of right now, I'm still holding out hope for him. But once again, Lovett is the next player directly after him in the class, and I fell in love with Lovett last year. Like I really did. I don't know what else to want than, he just dominated in a really bad offense, and now he's going to go to what we're expecting to be a pretty prolific offense. I get that, people are saying he's going to be the slot receiver, and like, what is that going to mean, and all that kind of stuff. I don't care. Like, they're going to throw for 4,000, 5,000 yards. Like, they have the easiest schedule in the history of the world. I just think he's going to score a shitload of points on a great team. And once again, like you said, Carson Beck is going to score points. Dominic Lovett's going to score points, and I think that they're both going to ride off into the NFL together. Just holding hands and getting really good draft capital. So yeah, I'm all over Dominic Lovett there. I think that I have one more player after Lovett. I guess we can just go ahead and get into him. It's Devontae Walker, out of UNC, and so like, they're kind of like the last players that I care about. I truly care about for this draft class. Not to say that there's no one else that's going to step up, or not to say there's no one else that I like have ranked here or whatever. But those are the kind of the players where I'm like, after that, and I don't need to like focus on these players for Devy purposes, like that kind of. Do you kind of feel the same way, or do you feel maybe there's a couple names that we should mention here?
I think that's a really good shout out as far as the specific player. Devontae Walker, we really need to NCAA to get going on just let him play. Like, he's only played for one other school. Like, that's the big, I don't know. I feel like that's a huge argument in his favor. He hasn't been cleared essentially to actually play at UNC, but I mean, come on, it's just a technicality, you would think. So hopefully that's coming in the next week. They've been advocating for it really hard. So that's been nice to see. So ultimately, Devontae Walker, he should test really well. Again, that speed is just crazy. So the NFL is going to love it. He just needs to play this year. So a little bit of a risk, but if you see a buy opportunity in a Devy league currently for Devontae Walker, or this goes for C2C, like, if you can just get a little bit of a discount at it, I'm not opposed to trying to take that shot. I know it's a gamble, but at the end of the day, I mean, sometimes you got to just bet on those things happening when you see a talented player like that who could explode this year. So yeah, good shout on Walker there.
Yeah, I mean, when you got the governor pushing for you to, for the NCAA to let you play, there's probably decent odds that you're going to get in and actually be able to play. And I think the last thing that last article I saw was saying like it's kind of expected that he will be able to play now. Obviously, nothing's set in stone, nothing's 100%, but I'm kind of feeling that way. Before we move on to a different position, do you feel like there's any other names that like truly need to be mentioned here? I mean, like we've been doing C2C recaps. Like there's a million other names that we can talk about, but do you think there's anyone that truly needs to be spoken here?
I would say don't forget completely about Ja'Cory Brooks, right? And I know it's a guy you've liked in the past. We've both liked to some degree and mentioned on the podcast. But Ja'Cory Brooks, Alabama wide receiver, and we know how the NFL really values that. If he is able to further break out this year, watch out. But also Malik Benson coming in there as a JUCO transfer to Alabama as well. Insane athleticism. You only need one blow up year. Jamison Williams showed us that at Alabama. Now, this is not the same Alabama as back then, so consider that also, right? But at the end of the day, Bama's going to win a lot of games. They're going to be able to still throw on some of these teams that they're playing. If he is either of these guys, if they're the number one at Alabama, that is useful, and there's some traits there that the NFL is going to covet. So I would say maybe consider them still in this conversation. As much as we're a little bit bitter at this point that they haven't blown up the way that we wanted them to. I'm sure there's so many managers out there who drafted them or got invested and said, "Hey, this guy's the next Alabama wide receiver," who was disappointed in a guy like Ja'Cory Brooks, but. Yeah, let's not completely close the book there. There's a chance we should mention him at least.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, although I will say, Jameson Williams was a junior when he transferred in, not a JUCO transfer. So it's a little different. But once again, Bama's going to get those eyes on him, on them. So, but why don't we go ahead and transfer over to the running backs here? I'm fumbling all my words, but here we are. I think that the running backs are going to be really interesting here because, like you said, we have some high-end talent, top-end talent, but I feel like really everyone in this class has some kind of question mark. We have Trevion Henderson at the top, Raheem Sanders, Rocket Sanders, Braylon Allen. Those are kind of like the consensus top three. Really, all three of them have some kind of question mark. Trevion Henderson hasn't proven that he can stay healthy, although he had an amazing freshman year. Rocket Sanders is still kind of, can he take that, like, not to say he didn't take some kind of step or anything like that, but, can he prove that he's truly, like, special, like a special player, like that kind of thing. We need to see that out of him this year. And then Braylon Allen, can he kind of come back to form, because that second year really wasn't anything spectacular. It was fine, but the offense in general wasn't all that great and all that. But also, is he going to build in some kind of receiving profile to his game, or is he just going to be that, like, between the tackles, grinder, that kind of thing? Albeit a huge one that can probably still be pretty damn good in the NFL. But how do you feel about those top three? Are you wavering on anybody, or are you feeling pretty good?
No, I'm feeling good on those guys. So ultimately, I still have them all projected in that first round range in the rookie drafts. That is for next year. So, like you mentioned, there are question marks out there. Trevion Henderson, I think he stays healthy. There's not something there that makes me think, oh yeah, this is going to be like a degenerative knee. Like there's just not that concern there. It's just he's been a bit nicked up, and you can see that at the running back position. Ultimately, I think they'll manage that well this year because there's a lot of running back talent there, or at least a lot of running backs available to them at Ohio State. So ultimately, they'll be a good team this year. They'll be able to rest him up as needed. Raheem Sanders, like you said, there's some questions as far as his ultimate game-breaking abilities, and he's bulked up a lot, like 6'2", 235. I don't know, somewhere in there. That's a big back for sure, and he doesn't necessarily have maybe the elite testing numbers of some guys like Trevion Henderson, for example. So that is a question. But the versatility of Sanders makes me think that at the very least, like Javonte Williams, think that. And I know Javonte Williams is maybe not the best comp in some ways because he hasn't panned out at the NFL level, probably due to injury, right? But just some similarities there to a degree. But and then Braylon Allen, like you said, he steps into a little bit of a different offense this year. He needs to be able to display a little bit in that receiving game, and then all of us will just come back to loving him, and essentially a less boring offense potentially could be a good thing for him. So I still like Braylon Allen. He doesn't have a lot of red flags, concerns, other than the fact that, is he competent as a receiving back? And maybe what are his testing numbers? I think his testing numbers are going to be great. He's a good athlete at a great size, too.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Now, the Rocket Sanders to Javonte, and I know you said, you kind of stepped it back a little bit, but like Javonte ran what, like a 4.6 or something like that? Like, it was pretty damn slow. You don't think the Rocket's that slow, do you?
I think Javonte was like a 4.5 mid, right? And then I think Rocket's a 4.5. Yeah. Yep. At 235, yes. Maybe when Rocket was, coming out, right? He was pretty quick, and he was pretty lean though at that point. And I think you get to a certain point. I mean, how many athletes at 230 plus actually run sub 4.5? Like, you got to be Jonathan Taylor basically, and even Taylor wasn't that big, was he? He's like 228, 225. I don't know. Maybe it was 230, but you got to be pretty freaky. And I think that he's a good athlete, maybe not, again, one of these freaks. He's not the quote unquote elite.
Javonte Williams ran a 4.62, so booyah.
Yeah.
I mean, and with the weight gain, maybe he will be. Hopefully, he won't be a 4.62, but maybe he will be that mid 4.5, 4.55, that kind of thing. But I don't know. Everyone seems to think that he's, at least a lot of people that I've heard from seem to think he's like this special athlete, like that kind of thing. So I guess I've just always assumed that he was faster. But like you said, with the weight gain, it definitely makes sense that he could slow down a little bit.
I double checked, and I don't know why this is showing up, but 4.55 is what they have Javonte at the combine. So I guess that's what I was seeing when I Googled it. So that's what I've been going off of, and that's a contested, come back to measure, I guess.
Yeah, we're gonna figure this out, and we will let you guys know which one is accurate there. All right, so the next tier below those top three, I have one player. Is that the same for you?
Let's see, who's this guy?
Donovan Edwards, baby. That's it. That's all I got. You got. Yep. I'm getting the nod of approval.
I'm in.
I think that he proved everything that we needed him to prove last year. I guess it was a little disconcerting that he couldn't beat up Blake Corum, or the team wasn't really giving him the touches. They were giving it all to Blake Corum. But we also know that I love Blake Corum. And so, it's not that surprising. I think that he's a quality back. But once Corum went down, it became the Donovan Edwards show. We saw everything that we needed to see to realize that he is a special talent. He is a good player. He's not that top tier special, but he could be. I mean, he honestly could be. If anything, for me, it was more like it's a smaller sample of him being extremely good. If we saw a little bit larger of a sample, or if we see it this year, then he could easily step into that top tier with those guys. But there's really no one else that I truly believe in right now that I could say like they have to be in this tier 2.
Yeah, I'm there with you for sure. And he was playing hurt last year, so Donovan Edwards being here, it makes me happy, just because he's a guy that I really believed in coming out, and there were folks who were skeptical of that translating, and I understand that it took Corum to get banged up, but Edwards has always been, mixing in just from the very start with Corum being there. So we know that Corum's a good college back for sure. The fact that Donovan Edwards has been able to get some playing time alongside him is a good sign. He's been involved in the passing game, and even with injuries cramping his style, he has been great breakaway runs that he displays out there. His athleticism is apparent. So a guy, if we talk testing, so again, maybe we go Raheem Sanders, if we are projecting him at a 4.5 range. I mean, we got to project Donovan Edwards in the 4.4s then. I think he's breaking away on those plays more often. So ultimately, yes, an exciting player. Donovan Edwards could rise even further. I could see him as high as maybe that RB2 in the class if things really break right.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, once again, in a smallish sample, not like truly small or anything like that, Edwards outproduced Blake Corum, but I still have Corum in that next tier, and I know most people are going to hate that. I still love the guy. I absolutely do. I don't care that he's 5'8". Doesn't bother me. Even Dirty Mike Valerie has been saying, like, throwing slander on his name, saying that he's 5'6". Like, come on, man. But do you absolutely hate Corum being in the next tier here, or are you okay with it?
No, I'm okay with it as well. But what is the order for the next tier is the question.
I have it Corum as the next player, and then I have Will Shipley, and then I have a tier break.
Okay, so a little bit of disagreement here, and that's
Okay.
fine because I still have Corum pretty close to those guys, but Shipley, I think it's safe to have him there right now. Certainly a guy who could fall, just depending on how that order after that flip flops, right? So if Shipley doesn't, maybe test at that elite level, maybe doesn't dominate and do what he needs to this season, certainly could get leapfrogged by a number of guys because there are talented guys after this. Let's insert Jace McClellan, Alabama running back, into this. And again, that's a projection, but sometimes we have to do that. And we have to say who is set up in an awesome situation, awesome talent, better size than like a Corum, for example, who is an elite recruit as well, or at least a very top end recruit, let's say. So yeah, Jason McCullen finally getting healthy. Let's see if he stays healthy this season. I really like him to have that huge role. That's not a novel idea, right? A lot of people have been catching on and anticipating that this season. But McClellan, I think he absolutely belongs in that conversation, especially when we're trying to project a year out. It's like, ooh, who could actually rise a lot? Jason McClellan is that guy, in my opinion, or one of the guys at least.
Yeah, so like I said, I have Corum and Shipley, and then I have a small tier break after that, and then I have Jarquez Hunter and Jace McClellan as the next two players. Now, obviously, Hunter's had some off the field issues, but he's back and playing, and so I'm not to say that like you shouldn't care about what he did or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about today. I'm just talking about the player, and I feel like he's going to be just fine if the NFL is okay with it. Then then I'm okay. Well, I'm not okay with it, but then I'm okay with the player, I should say. But I actually have a giant tier here. Those two were just the top two of the tier. So I don't know how you're going to feel about this or not. But I have Jarquez Hunter, Jason McClellan, Devin Neal, Bucky Irving, Audric Estime, and Mayan Williams all in a tier here. And I feel like it's kind of like that, like, could take a next step but hasn't quite done it yet tier, like that kind of thing. Or with Bucky, it's just like he actually has done it, but he's just not quite the size that we're hoping for. So like it's, I don't know, it's a giant tier here. How do you feel about those players? I know I've kind of gotten you on the Audric Estime boat here, but I don't know if you're this on board.
Yeah, so I'm on board with him ahead of Mayan Williams, for example. I just think that Mayan Williams is a bit more limited. I'm just not convinced that he's a breakaway guy. Like, yes, he's fun to watch play because he is physical, but I just think he's a big back who, yes, he'll break tackles at the college level, but at the NFL level, just a grinder. And uh, honestly, I think that Estime has the potential to be on the higher end of the grinder scale. Let's say I don't know if that's really like a
That was
great
the
term,
nicest
right?
thing. That was the nicest thing you've ever said about Audric Estime, and I've been talking to you about him for like 2 years now.
Absolutely. I mean, now that he actually has that backfield to himself, he can do some nice things this season. He has already been, flashing some of those nice things in the previous years. So by no means is Audrey Esme a bad player. Maybe he's the arbitrage or the cheap version of a Braylon Allen, I guess. I mean, in some ways, right? Big back, maybe not quite as tall as Braylon Allen, and maybe not quite all the testing numbers, but at the same time, he's no slouch himself, right? Estimate's kind of a beast. So I don't mind him in that conversation. I also have Estimate there, Irving, Devin Neal, Jarquez Hunter. Even though there's been some hype that Demaria Alston at Auburn has also been making a case to be like kind of a co-starter or like the 1B. I don't think ultimately that's just going to lead to Hunter's demise. I think maybe the off the field stuff could be the bigger deterrent ultimately for him getting his chance at the NFL level. But I think that the NFL is kind of quick to forget those things, especially when they're kind of in the past. So if that does not resurface, then we can see Jarquez Hunter, Auburn back, rise. I didn't hear a Jaquindon Jackson, Utah, in there. I think that he's right in that conversation. Um, Again, a guy who has not really put it all together quite yet, but now he gets more opportunity this year.
I feel like Jaquindon Jackson is a lot more of a projection than people want to admit. And I feel like it's just like he was this sleeper of all sleepers that like no one really knew who he was and all that kind of stuff. And then now because of that, like people have gotten overly hyped about him. I'm not saying that he can't do something or whatever, but I cannot possibly have him in that tier just yet. Like he has some. Like he has some nice pieces to his game. He's not much of a receiver, so like we don't love that. He has great size. I mean, obviously, what was he, a converted quarterback, right? So like he has great size. He has all that, but I mean, the dude has attempted 80 rushing attempts. Like let's all calm down a little bit. You want to talk about small samples? Like let's calm down just a bit. So yeah, I like what I've seen out of Jaquindon Jackson. I need to see a lot more, and I need to see a little bit more in that receiving game, because otherwise you're just talking about a much worse version of Braylon Allen, and I'm not like all in on that, because there's people that are like not in on Braylon Allen just because he's Braylon Allen. He doesn't catch all that many passes. Well, take the worst, more raw version of that, and yeah, I don't want that player.
Yeah, right, right. He does need to step up in the receiving game, but you look at what Tavion Thomas, held up as far as carries, just being the guy who had been there, the veteran running back, right? Who kind of got into the doghouse at times. And that really allowed the coaching staff to see, wow, Jaquindon is the most efficient rusher out of that backfield. And ultimately, with Tavion Thomas gone and with Micah Bernard just really being more of a complementary back, like a receiving back, yes, he is competent in that role. So we need Jaquindon to take on some of those receptions. But I think it could happen, honestly. A guy who, like you said, I mean, he's kind of that same build as Braylon, and or some similarities there. And by the way, what's up with all the tall running backs in this class? Like, I feel like we have a bunch of guys who are like 6'2", 6'1". Like, I mean, we're talking Raheem, Braylon, Donovan Edwards is even like that 6 foot area. Trey Benson's 6'1". I don't know if we even talked about Trey Benson yet, but he's definitely in that tier there. At least for me. For me, he's definitely in that tier. And then we just talked about Estime's maybe not quite that tall, but Jaquindon's like 6'2" as well.
Yeah, Benson, I have directly after Mayan Williams. I probably should have included him, but it's kind of like a murky situation or murky part of it where I could probably have a tier break, but could also just probably include him.
Yeah. And then one last guy I would like to include is just Marshawn Lloyd. It, Formerly South Carolina, top end recruit, injuries struck, and then now he's at USC and he's lined up to be the starter there. Like, he looked good in the spring. Looks like it's his job. He's just going to be the lead guy there. I'm not a believer in the Austin Jones, who's also there. He's just not an efficient back compared to Marshawn Lloyd, who I think has an opportunity to really come back into full health here and put up good numbers at USC. And we like these USC backs as far as production and potentially draft capital as well. So athletically, he has something there from a twitch standpoint for a big back. I mean, he's in that, I don't know what his updated weight is. He's like in the two teens, I would guess, but maybe he's more. I'm not sure, but he's definitely hard to bring down, powerful back. So I'm pretty excited for him. Another guy who you have to project a bit, but Marshawn Lloyd could be a definite riser in this class. I mean, I could see him rising up into the top 7 for sure.
Yeah, I don't have Lloyd all that far behind Benson, handful of spots, but I have Jonathan Brooks right ahead of Lloyd. And so, and once kind of a projection, hasn't seen too much work. Obviously, was behind Roshan and Bijan last year, so it is a projection. But we're kind of expecting him to at least see the ball this year, if not be like a 1A to Cedric Baxter's 1B, or possibly just the one. I would say that's less likely, but like I think that Baxter's going to see the field, but it's not impossible either. But I mean, just looking at what they did with Bijan and Roshan, you would kind of expect it to be like a 1A, 1B kind of deal. And if that's the case, then we could easily see Jonathan Brooks, take a step forward this year and then get into the draft capital, like get into the draft talks and like that kind of thing. So I don't think it's all that crazy, but I like the Lloyd call. Honestly, after that, there's really not too many people that I'm like that I truly maybe a Ray Davis, somebody like that, but yeah, probably not. Devin Mockabee, like it just seems like it falls off pretty damn hard here.
Now, at one point, you liked Roman Hemby as far as you were saying that his production was pretty much in the same category as like even a Will Shipley in some ways. Now, talk to me just a little bit about Hemby from
I
Maryland.
completely I completely skipped over Hemby. So he's directly after Bucky Irving. So it's Bucky Irving, Roman Hemby, Audric Estime, Mayan Williams. So yeah, I'm still like not like overly hyped, but I definitely like him. I think he should be in that mix. He's kind of at that, right around that weight limit that we want him to be, but not quite there. Like he has some question marks. He's not exactly the like explosive athlete that we would love to see, but I mean he's put up some solid numbers. And I mean you want to talk about the receiving profile? Like he has a damn good receiving profile there. So I love all that, but the BMI is not amazing. The points per touch are good, not great or anything. So I don't know that I feel like overly amazing about Hemby, but I think he's just one of those solid contributors that you can say, oh, maybe he's going to get decent draft capital, be a backup to somebody, and then you can plug him in and when the starter gets hurt, that kind of deal.
Right. If you're looking for a lot of upside, I just don't think that Hemby has it. But like you said, a guy in the third round of rookie drafts going to be like a Chase Brown type of guy where in the right situation, he could take on a lot of carries. And honestly, I mean, he's been more efficient, right? Davey, better in a lot of ways than Chase Brown. But just at the end of the day, maybe a guy that you snag in the third round if he gets into that nice landing spot, because I would think he'd get drafted at least. Maybe get a nice role depending on how things fall. So yeah, Roman Hemby, one last guy to consider there amongst quite a few running backs. We always see guys rise up, so there's a chance that another guy, of course, rises into that range too. So that should leave you somewhat encouraged for the 2024 running back class.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how it all plays out, and see if there's any names that do truly like jump into that mix. But I think this is going to be the easiest one. Moving over to quarterbacks, obviously you have Drake May and Caleb Williams there at 1-2, and then you have who? I don't know. We have to figure that out. And obviously we have a pretty large mix of players that could be that QB3. But I really think that there's maybe two that I truly believe will be the QB3, or at least for me, the QB3 for me. Beyond that, it starts getting really tough. Like, so I've made it very well known that I love JJ McCarthy. I think he's my QB3 as of right now. KJ Jefferson is my QB4 in the 24 class, and then Jordan Travis is my QB5 there. But I would say that you almost have like three different tiers there. So you're already at a teardrop after Drake and Caleb, and then JJ's there, teardrop, KJ's there, teardrop, Jordan Travis is there, and then you could even probably throw in Riley Leonard and Jalen Daniels into that tier if you really wanted to with Travis. How are you feeling about those tiers and those players? Do you have anyone else that you're throwing into the mix there?
Yeah, as far as McCarthy, yes, there's definitely that chance that he is the QB3 in the class. Like you said, he has a little bit of separation amongst those guys as far as some of the advanced metrics, and all these guys, they need to take that step forward. So we just have to say, like, who has some of the traits, who has potential opportunity to be on a good team, because oftentimes these guys who come out of not out of nowhere but really break out into that first round, status or that earlier first status, yes, they're on a decent team or they have some success, right? Even like the Kenny Pickett's, for him to be able to draft Kenny Pickett to be able to get drafted in the first by the Pittsburgh Steelers, he had to have a big time breakout season. So has a lot changed at Michigan where they're going to want to throw the ball like bonkers? I'm not sure, but ultimately NFL teams, they also like the toolsy guys. JJ McCarthy has some of those. So I don't mind that there. I'll also throw some guys into there. I know you're not a big Bo Nix guy, but honestly, I think Bo Nix, Oregon, he's going to get some draft buzz. What materializes out of that, I'm not sure. He has really developed a lot, though, as far as just going over to Oregon. That did wonders for his game and keeps up another year of just being in a more refined offense. A little bit of an offensive change potentially with the offensive coordinators switching. So I'm curious to see what happens there. But yeah, I mean, his beginning of his career, Auburn, gross. His development there, gross. So Bo Nix with another year, there's potential. You mentioned Jalen Daniels, Kansas. Yeah, we've talked about his arm strength in the past too. That's probably my one area where like, is the NFL going to really think he's a top end guy? Riley Leonard, maybe some of those same concerns, but I think both those guys are great mentions there. I like it. I'm not going to advocate for Joe Milton to be in this discussion because I think he's a poor quarterback, but ultimately the arm talent, I should say, because that's really the one thing the guy has. Well, that's going to intrigue people. So we have to at least mention him, but not necessarily advocate for him, right? And KJ Jefferson, guy gets not enough credit for what he's doing at Arkansas, but we've talked about it before. It's like, is there going to be anything that really changes this year? Like, why did he not come out this past year? He's probably going to do the same thing again. He's lost multiple targets out of that offense. Like, again, I think he's a good player. What is the breakout scenario there? So I talked about a lot of those options, and if the listeners can't tell, I'm not convinced. I'm not incredibly enthused, right, about that list. And that goes back to our discussion earlier. What are the chances there's another top 10 drafted quarterback in this class? I don't love that chance. There could be one guy, maybe one or two. And we haven't even mentioned Quinn Ewers. So I do have to, I have to put him in there, Texas quarterback, ultimately a guy who needs to take a big jump, but he has everything as far as a situation goes that you'd want out of a guy making that jump.
Yeah, I have Milton and Ewers back to back, and that's not saying much. I have Carson Beck. Actually, that's kind of hilarious. I just realized that I have Carson Beck tied with Quinn Ewers, so I'm giving them the same odds to hit. So, however you feel about that, that's how I'm feeling about it. But I think that like you said, bringing it back to how we feel about the QBs of the class. I don't know. I don't know that we have the same excitement because, even going back to Anthony Richardson, you were talking about a young, raw, hyper athletic player. We don't have any of that in this class. Like we have Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. that are like 92 years old. We have even Joe Milton's probably the same age. Quinn Ewers is maybe that young prospect that we can say, he could stand out this year. He could get that draft capital. So I guess we could say that Quinn Ewers could be that guy. But man, he has not shown it so far. And and the more I dive into Ewers as a player, as a prospect, and all that kind of stuff, like he missed his senior year. He reclassified, but didn't he have like an injury or he didn't play or whatever it was? Then he doesn't play year one at Ohio State. Then he comes over to Texas and he doesn't look all that amazing. Like, it's been 4 years since Quinn Ewers has been good at anything. Like, it's starting to get a little worrisome there. So I think that I've made it very clear how I feel about Ewers, and then I don't expect him to take that next step. But obviously, I think you're probably holding out a little more hope than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of it is just because, like you said, I mean, he came out early. Nobody really expected him. He should have still been in high school to do things at Ohio State with the guys that they had there, right? Second overall drafted quarterback in CJ Stroud. Like, there's no way that Ewers as a true freshman is going to get on the field for notable snaps there. But yeah, this last year was not necessarily that promising, but taking into the consideration that he was banged up, taking into consideration that in first year in that offense, some new pieces, some inconsistency there, even from the wide receivers. Like we talked about Xavier Worthy, a good wide receiver prospect out of Texas. I mean, he was dropping balls last year, and some of it may have had to do with a broken hand or wrist. There was something weird that he was dealing with there, but just getting on the same page with those guys. He's had a whole off season. He shaved the mullet, man. The hairstyle, he's taking it serious. You can tell by the hair. No doubt Quinn Ewers he's locked in this year.
All right, so like I said, I will admit that he's probably the one that can skyrocket if it happens. But man, he has to take such a big leap. He really does. But yeah, other than that, I honestly, it's another like big tier break from there, and I don't even know that I truly need to mention these names, but Jaden Daniels and Jackson Dart maybe have the slightest chance of getting up into that mix. You know, Jaden Daniels goes out and puts up like a badass season for LSU. LSU kind of dominates. Next thing you know, he's on the list. We know he's going to be hyper athletic. Obviously, he's a little older and all that kind of stuff. But then, you know, Jackson Dart was people were basically saying that he was going to lose his job to Spencer Sanders. And now it's like a complete 180. People are saying he looks amazing in camp and this and that. I'm not a big Jackson Dart believer. I never have been. Even when people were saying like he was the number one guy in the class and all that, 2-3 years ago. But like I said, the slightest chance that maybe it could be one of those two guys. How do you feel about them?
No, I think that's fair to mention them. And I'll even mention like a Spencer Rattler, who's even more left for dead, or a former high end guy who was drafted just super, super high at one point and has really fallen flat on his face. So I think that there's some barriers for Rattler ever really achieving anything close to what we thought he could. But you never know. He was starting to catch fire last season. So I guess maybe we should still consider him just as a potential guy who could skyrocket, just off of his arm talent, things like that. But yeah, I don't know. We're getting down into the dregs here amongst guys, quarterbacks, but there's plenty of talent out there. There's old guy Sam Hartman from Wake Forest going to Notre Dame. You mentioned Michael Penix before. Who else are we missing? There's a couple of guys, Dylan Gabriel, who's just hung around forever. Probably
Tyler
not
Van
hype,
Dyke. I
right?
was hyped on Tyler Van Dyke at one point, then he completely fell off. And now I've actually heard him mentioned recently, like people getting kind of back hyped, and I'm not there. I talked to you about that. I talked to you about the Will Levis line, and I put Levis back into the model before, and I like Tyler Van Dyke is literally. No, I'm sorry. Bo Nix is the player ahead of Will Levis on the Will Levis line. Tyler Van Dyke is the player ahead of him. So like, it's the closest by the skin of their teeth. They're making it right now. DJU is the player directly behind Will Levis. So he's out. He's done. And actually, Spencer Rattler's the player directly behind him. So I'm out.
Yeah, and I get that at this point, right? You're not really paying a lot to roster them in any type of league right now. But what was one other guy? Oh yeah, we haven't even mentioned really the Alabama and the Ohio State quarterbacks, probably for good reason because those competitions have not been firmly won over by a single guy yet, and that's concerning. But maybe it says just potentially says to the competition going on there. I think it says mostly due to the talent, right? If there was truly elite guys, maybe one would separate. But I don't know. Maybe at Ohio State there's just two studs. There that is a potential possibility, but it's becoming more and more likely. It's like Devin Brown might see the field more than what we'd like if Kyle McCord is actually really good. And with the Alabama room, that's just getting to be a little bit messy. But we have a long season ahead of us. Who knows what happens? Keep an eye on those rooms. But for now, yeah, I'm not strongly buying any of those guys. Maybe I am buying Devin Brown, however, in the next class at Ohio State.
Yeah, and honestly, he's behind the Will Levis line. But if I was gonna pick any of them, especially like thinking cost wise and everything, and I know that he's not truly getting hyped anymore. He had like his small moment, but I'd still be picking up Tyler Buckner for as cheap as possible. I feel like he's going to start at some point. If it's not week one, he's going to start at some point this year. And the whole like timidness of who's going to be the starter at Bama and all that just leads me to believe, like you were saying, like that they don't truly have a guy. I don't think, especially for Bama, Ohio State, you could probably make a better argument of you have two studs, that kind of thing. I don't think that's the case, but there's a better argument there. With Bama, I really truly think it's they don't know who the hell is going to start because they don't know who the hell is going to start. And so if that's the case, even if it is Milroe to start the season, I don't think either one of us, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I don't think that Jalen Milroe is good. I don't think that you truly do either. But obviously he's athletic and and all that kind of stuff. That's not going to get the job done necessarily unless their defense is just that damn good. So I don't think it's that insane. Yes, Tyler Buckner has some big warts on his profile. He's also looked decent at times, in a small sample, of course. But like he's shown that he can actually throw the ball that I don't think Jalen Milroe's ever done. We've never even really seen Ty Simpson on the field, so we can't even say that. Like while we thought that he was going to be a better passer of the ball, at this point, can we even say that if he can't beat out Milroe? And so I don't know. It's all very confusing and all that, but I think that you can get Buckner pretty cheap because people are just like, I'm completely out. And then, like I said, at some point he might be starting. Now, he's not going to be. I mean, he's not coming out this year unless he just absolutely has some like amazing thing. So he doesn't really. It's not really relevant to the 24 class, I don't think, unless once again he just has some amazing season. But that was just kind of a little like tangent there that I maybe go get Buckner.
It's a fun tangent, especially for those who are listening this deep into the podcast. You care about these quarterbacks, and ultimately, I do think if we're going to say it's telling that Milroe and what's his name can't really separate in that Alabama quarterback room, well, what's to say that Buckner's still at that QB3 spot? He's not even in the running from what I've heard in all the camp reports. Like he's kind of been the clear three. He just got there, but at the end of the day, he's familiar with the offensive coordinator. If he was truly going to usurp them, you'd think that he'd be pushing and splitting, maybe a three-way split, something like that with the starters. So like you said, maybe less of a 2023 or 24 class consideration for Buckner. Maybe that's a future play if he somehow gets on the field, late in the season, something like that.
Yeah, honestly, all it is that like I just want to get a piece of that Bama offense, and I think that he's by far the cheapest one because people are going to expect that Jalen Milroe starting now, and they might still expect that Ty Simpson's better than Milroe, and everyone just kind of hates Buckner, and I get it. Like I'm not trying to say that he's this amazing prospect or anything at this point. He's definitely shown that he's not the perfect 5-star prospect like 247 thought he was, but I think that you can get him really cheap, and I want to have somebody in that offense. Just like if you could get Devin Brown really cheap, you would love to get him for Ohio State. You can't get Devin Brown cheap, I don't think. You can't get either one of those players cheap. If anything, you got to go get like a freshman or something like that. And you know how I feel about freshman QBs, so.
Fair. I did draft Holtz in one league. Just it was a deep selection, and probably that was before even some of your research came out too. So that actually makes me double guess. Like, is that a smart investment? No, but like you said, sometimes these big time systems it does work out to draft those guys if you're not especially convinced about the current starters there.
Yeah, and the research was never to deter people from making late round picks on some of these positions. It's the early round picks that I'm more concerned about. When you're giving up a second round supplemental pick for this unproven freshman in the Pac-12, that's when I start freaking out about it. But we've talked about all that kind of stuff way too much. So hour 20 did a pretty solid 2024 rookie class talk. I'm feeling better about the class now than when I first started talking tonight. So like I'm feeling good about it. I still think the wide receivers are a little iffy. I'm a little concerned about the wide receivers because I mean, maybe players will get pushed up because there's not that many spectacular wide receivers in the class, and so like you'll get some guys that get first and second round draft capital that don't necessarily deserve it, which might help us because then we're going to be able to avoid those landmines in the actual rookie drafts, while other people are like, "Ooh, first round draft capital." So I don't know. Maybe it's all going to work out, and I had nothing to be concerned about.
Yeah, I do hope that it'll work out, and I think that there's enough wide receiver talent where it does. So ultimately, yeah, good look at the class. It should leave you all feeling pretty optimistic, and maybe some motivation to put out some feelers out there for the trades if you're in a dynasty league, or if you're just interested in getting your hands on a couple of these players we talked about tonight.
Completely off script here. I'm throwing it to you. If you had to pick one player that you were like you're in a Devy league and you have to pick one player that you're going to try and trade for from the 2024 class, who's that one player, assuming cost and all that kind of stuff? So if you say Caleb Williams, you got to pay Caleb Williams prices.
Yeah, those are hefty prices. As much as I love to pay those prices, I also don't like to pay those prices for guys who haven't even made it to the league quite yet. So, probably pass on some of those very, very top end options. I'm still a big fan of Travion Henderson, but like you said, if you have to pay those types of prices, I have a feeling those managers aren't really wanting to budge at the moment. There might be some though that are less confident that he stays healthy. So, I consider Henderson, but I'll probably go deeper and I'll go with maybe a Marshawn Lloyd because I think his cost has been suppressed pretty well. And I still think that there's a possibility, like I said earlier, as high as maybe like in the top 7 RBs in the class. So that's maybe my guy. I didn't put a lot of thought into it. Like you said, it's just kind of a spur of the moment. Do you have one of those guys, John, that you really think that you got to get?
I mean, I think you can still get Dorian Singer pretty damn cheap. Obviously, like I'm getting him in like the third round of the supplemental draft, so he can't be that valuable in trades and all that. But if we're going back to the running backs, I think that you can get Audric Estime pretty damn cheap, and I do feel like he has the potential to rise in draft value and everything because he's going to be the guy this year. And we've talked to certain people that seem to believe that he's going to be like a top 100 and something draft pick in the NFL and everything. So I'm starting to get pretty hyped about Estime. I've always been a little hyped about Estime, but I feel like you can get him pretty damn cheap, and he might be like he might be the cheapest option that you have at a workhorse running back, a potential workhorse running back in the NFL. Not saying it's guaranteed or anything like that, but you're not going to have to pay guaranteed prices either.
Yeah, I don't mind that call at all. I've invested in him. I have him in one league, and for a reason, right? Because I think that there's certainly a chance that he rises, and like you said, a reasonable buy at the moment. Some of these guys, though, as we talk about them more and more and more, you might start losing your opportunity to invest in them. Or, I mean, the season's right around the corner, right? We're like a week away, so ultimately, make your offers quickly if you think that they're going to break out this season, or if you like some of the guys that we pointed out.
Absolutely. Well, as always, we appreciate you guys listening. I'm glad we got back to Devy and got back to the 2024 class. And obviously, we'll be revisiting this at some point in the season, probably about halfway through. I think last year we did it maybe after like 6 weeks or so, something like that. We started looking into it. And at the time, I remember somebody gave me crap for it, but I said that Sean Tucker had kind of fallen off. And he did at the beginning of the season, and people were giving me shit about it. And now, of course, he ended up having a better second half of the year and that kind of thing. So he ended up getting back into my good graces. But it's kind of just funny how that all worked out with him having the heart problem and all that. Now he's an undrafted free agent. It's like, man, I don't know. Maybe we need to pay attention to some of this stuff.
Yeah, life comes at you quick. Things change fast. So stay tuned for some of the updates.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you once again. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out. We will see you next time.